That's why a lot of these celebrities that start these things, they can't keep up. Like the Meghan Markles.
But you're the same.
You're the same.
What if Meghan Markle's darkest secret was never about royalty, but about what happened long before she met Prince Harry? In a shocking turn no one saw coming, Meghan Markle has finally broken her silence, confirming a long-whispered affair that traces back to the scandalous parties hosted by the late Jeffrey Epstein. And the man at the center? None other than Prince Andrew. This revelation could rewrite everything we thought we knew, not just about Meghan, but about the royal family's darkest alliances. What really happened during those elusive yacht gatherings? What did Meghan admit in her private statement? And how deep does this go? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, the whispers lingered just beneath the surface. They flickered through tabloids like sparks waiting for dry leaves. Rumors, conspiracies, denials, silences. But now, the silence is broken. In a world where headlines fade as quickly as they flash, one story has clung stubbornly to public imagination: Meghan Markle, former actress, duchess, and global icon, embroiled in an affair scandal that stretches from the sun-kissed decks of billionaire yachts to the cloistered corridors of royal palaces. This isn't just about an affair. It's about what it represents: power, control, secrets, and the terrifying fragility of reputation in an era of digital immortality. The title says it all. Are the rumors true? Meghan Markle finally speaks out on her scandalous affair. But what the title doesn't say is how deeply embedded this alleged affair was in the machinery of wealth, sex, and royal privilege. Because this isn't just about Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew. It's about the murky underworld of high society. About the men who host private island parties for the elite, the women who are recruited for reasons that go far beyond socializing, and the global institutions that look the other way. It began, as so many of these stories do, quietly. A photograph here, a blurry camera flash there, an anonymous tip to a journalist who swore they were onto something big. Then came the pieces, small at first, disconnected, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. But those fragments began to form a pattern. That pattern started to resemble a map. And that map pointed to one name: Meghan Markle. Not just the glamorous royal consort, but someone who, it is now claimed, was once part of an elite social web orbiting the late Jeffrey Epstein, convicted sex offender, financier, and accused architect of a global trafficking ring that ensnared the rich, the powerful, and the voiceless. The suggestion that Meghan's path to royal status may have included a sordid detour through the parties Epstein was infamous for is no longer just the stuff of fringe blogs and conspiracies. It's become central to a developing narrative that she herself has now, in part, addressed. In newly leaked audio that some insiders claim is Meghan's own voice, the former Duchess appears to admit that yes, she did know Prince Andrew before she met Prince Harry. Yes, it was during those parties. And yes, something happened. The exact nature of what happened remains hotly debated, but it's enough to reignite a firestorm. This introduction is not about proving guilt or innocence. It's about context. Because if we're going to understand what Meghan has finally come forward to say, we must first understand what she's being accused of. We must retrace the path she's taken. From Hollywood B-lister to British royalty, from television screens to Buckingham Palace balconies, and now, back into the darkest corners of high society's most protected secrets. Let's start with the setting: Epstein's world. A world where wealth operated like oxygen, every breath dependent on status, access, and silence. Epstein's parties were not ordinary gatherings. They were choreographed performances, attended by politicians, royalty, scientists, and stars. Behind closed doors, the rules were rewritten. Cameras were banned. Security was tight. Guests arrived by private jet. And in this rarefied atmosphere, rumors say Meghan made her first appearance. It wasn't just the glitz that caught attention. It was the company. The parties were known for featuring models, actresses, and socialites, some knowingly, others allegedly manipulated or coerced. There were whispers of transactions without paperwork, of young women flown in and out with no record, of alliances formed not on merit but on mutual leverage. Epstein, as we now know, collected secrets the way museums collect paintings, carefully, obsessively, and with the long-term goal of control. If Meghan was there, and mounting circumstantial evidence suggests she was, then what was her role? Was she a guest? A participant? A bystander? A manipulated pawn? These are the questions that exploded across social media the moment the first unverified guest lists appeared years ago. Meghan's name was not on the initial lists, but neither were many others. Epstein's records were notoriously incomplete and allegedly doctored to protect the powerful. Still, journalists followed the threads. Former yacht crew members began speaking out. One ex-staff member, who requested anonymity, claimed that Meghan was seen on a superyacht off the coast of Nice, allegedly at an Epstein-hosted event where Prince Andrew was also present. The dates line up with a period in Meghan's life that's relatively undocumented, post-suits but pre-Harry, a time she herself has glossed over in public narratives. The exact same period during which several of Epstein's most well-connected events were known to take place. Fast forward to today. A voice recording emerges, subtle, unconfirmed, but hauntingly similar to Meghan's. The voice speaks of a party, of a man she didn't expect to meet, of how everything changed after that summer. The source of the tape? Still murky. But media outlets that once ignored the affair narrative are now scrambling to validate it. If we assume the voice is real, and many have, it becomes the first time Meghan has ever acknowledged knowing Prince Andrew before Harry. And that changes everything. Because it suggests premeditation. It suggests that the love story sold to the world, of two souls connecting via Instagram DMs and falling in love over shared charity interests, may have had a prelude far more scandalous than previously believed. We are not here to pass judgment, only to examine the implications. If Meghan's affair with Andrew occurred, even briefly, it would mean that the royal family accepted into its core a woman who had already engaged in secret liaisons with one of its most disgraced members. It would mean that Harry, knowingly or not, brought someone into the monarchy with deep, unresolved ties to the very scandal his family tried to suppress. It also recontextualizes Meghan's infamous 2021 Oprah interview. When she spoke of being silenced, was it only about race and class and royal hierarchy? Or was there something else, something unspeakable, beneath that silence? Was her public fight for voice and truth a strategic shield against the day this story would break? Her critics would say yes, that she's always known this day was coming, that her embrace of feminism, of social justice, of being a voice for the voiceless, was calculated insulation against the inevitable exposure of her own past. Her supporters argue the opposite, that she's a woman surviving a system built to destroy her, that her past, no matter how messy, has been weaponized to discredit everything she's tried to stand for. That's what makes this story so incendiary. It's not just the alleged affair. It's what the affair symbolizes, the intersection of fame, trauma, class warfare, misogyny, and power. Meghan, like Diana before her, has become a lightning rod for public rage and fantasy. But unlike Diana, Meghan now faces a digital inquisition where every whisper becomes a headline, and every mistake is immortal. And yet, here she is, speaking out, whatever the truth is. And we'll dig deeper into that in the chapters ahead. This video is not about condemnation. It's about uncovering a narrative long buried under denials, distractions, and deflections. It's about connecting dots that have sat ignored for years. And above all, it's about answering one question. If Meghan Markle truly had an affair with Prince Andrew, one rooted in the darkest shadows of elite society, what does that say about the monarchy, the media, and the myths we're all so eager to believe? Stay with us, because the story is only just beginning. Before the scandal, before the leaked audio tapes, the accusations, and the ferocious media storm. Before Buckingham Palace was dragged into yet another international firestorm, there was simply Meghan Markle, actress, humanitarian, and someone trying to write her own narrative in a world built to distort it. This chapter isn't about salacious affairs or secret parties. It's about the version of Meghan the world thought it knew, and the carefully curated life that preceded the explosion of allegations tying her to Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein's inner circle. To understand how deeply the seeds of this scandal were planted, you must first understand who Meghan was before royalty. Not the woman the palace rebranded as a duchess, but the Meghan of Hollywood, audition rooms, Instagram filters, and cross-continental hustle. Her journey from relative obscurity to global recognition was not accidental. It was engineered. With charm, strategy, and calculated social moves, Meghan turned every opportunity into a ladder rung. Every introduction became a gateway. And every room she entered, she made sure to leave with a contact, a connection, or a promise. Born in Los Angeles to a black mother and white father, Meghan grew up straddling two worlds that were never fully at peace. She attended private school, where she navigated the subtle but relentless pressures of race and class, and later pursued a degree in theater and international studies at Northwestern. Even as a young woman, those who knew her said she carried herself like someone destined for more. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was always watching, always calculating. Meghan's early career was far from glamorous. She took roles in low-budget films, appeared as a briefcase model on a game show, and juggled small acting gigs with lifestyle blogging and travel writing. Her now-defunct blog, The Tig, was one of her first attempts to control her own image, an elegant blend of aspirational aesthetics, personal philosophies, and carefully chosen social affiliations. Her voice was always polished, always diplomatic, rarely controversial, and always angled toward a broader audience. Her big break came in the form of Suits, a legal drama where she played Rachel Zane. The show's moderate success gave Meghan financial independence and a steady platform, but more importantly, it introduced her to a new echelon of society. Through red carpet events, charity galas, and fashion collaborations, she began to drift into elite social circles where royalty, tech moguls, and international financiers weren't just names in a magazine. They were dinner companions, and sometimes benefactors. The years between 2014 and 2016 are the most critical and the most opaque in Meghan's pre-royal timeline. Publicly, she was promoting Suits and jet-setting for charity events in Rwanda and India. Privately, sources suggest this was the period where she began attending more exclusive gatherings, yacht parties in the Mediterranean, art shows in Monaco, and invitation-only events hosted by names that wouldn't appear on any official guest list. These weren't your average celebrity parties. These were playgrounds for the world's wealthiest men, hosted in places where paparazzi were banned, and NDAs were standard entry requirements. This is the space where the Epstein connection begins to surface. Not proven, but rumored with increasing confidence by journalists who've traced social calendars and flight records. Several photographs surfaced during this period that placed Meghan in proximity to individuals linked to Epstein's orbit. A luxury yacht anchored off the coast of Ibiza, a charity ball in New York, a private retreat in the Caribbean. No damning evidence, no smoking gun, just coincidences. But as this story later proves, coincidences can snowball into allegations that refuse to disappear. By the time Meghan met Prince Harry, she was no longer a Hollywood novice. She had attended Fashion Week in Paris, made appearances at high-profile events, and been linked, romantically or otherwise, to a handful of well-connected men. One of them was a Toronto-based chef. Another, a British businessman. There were whispers of a Saudi investor. None confirmed, but all part of a growing narrative that Meghan was more than just an actress. She was someone navigating the upper echelons of power, a chameleon who could move effortlessly between the causes of the underprivileged and the luxuries of the ultra-wealthy. This duality is what made Meghan both fascinating and polarizing. To her supporters, she was a modern woman breaking barriers, bringing authenticity to archaic institutions. To her critics, she was an opportunist, someone who knew how to say all the right things in public while maneuvering for status in private. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in between. But perception is a powerful weapon, especially when your name becomes attached to royalty. The first time the press noticed something odd was during Meghan's early royal appearances. Reporters who had long covered the Windsors began digging into her past with a fervor usually reserved for political exposés. Background checks were requested. Former colleagues were approached for interviews. Private investigators were hired by tabloids eager to uncover a scandal. And slowly, an uncomfortable question began surfacing in newsroom discussions. Was there something or someone in Meghan's past that the palace didn't want revealed? Enter the early whispers about Prince Andrew. At first, they seemed too far-fetched to entertain. Andrew, the disgraced royal entangled in the Epstein scandal, and Meghan, the American actress turned duchess? It sounded like a tabloid fantasy. But when anonymous sources began hinting that their paths may have crossed long before Meghan met Harry, the rumor took root. Journalists who had previously investigated Epstein's network started revisiting flight manifests and social calendars. Meghan's name appeared in no official logs, but her movements during those crucial years were difficult to trace, particularly in Europe and the Caribbean. One reporter described the pursuit of her past as chasing a ghost through a mirror maze. Everywhere they looked, reflections of something real, but never solid enough to pin down. And that's precisely what makes this chapter so important. It's the stillness before the chaos. It's the timeline that many chose not to examine too closely because doing so meant confronting uncomfortable questions about who Meghan was before the crown and who may have helped her get there. The public image of Meghan during this time was carefully protected. Her Instagram was filled with quotes about empowerment, photographs of humanitarian work, and behind-the-scenes looks at her dog Guy. Her interviews spoke of mindfulness, gratitude, and gender equity. And yet, the tone of her interviews shifted subtly over time. Gone was the carefree blogger. In her place stood someone rehearsed, polished, and aware of how every word would be dissected. This wasn't just a personal transformation. It was professional preparation for what, we now understand, would be one of the most controversial royal introductions in modern history. Meghan's relationship with Harry was announced in late 2016. By then, she had already deleted much of her digital history. The TIG was shut down. Her social media accounts went dark. Official statements referred to this as a necessary transition into royal life. But skeptics pointed out the timing. Just months before her royal debut, Meghan scrubbed years of photos, posts, and connections from public view. Was it simply to preserve privacy? Or was there something in that digital trail that would have raised questions the royal institution wasn't prepared to answer? This chapter closes not with a scandal, but with a silence. A gap. A window of time that remains largely undocumented. Meghan's pre-Harry years have become a battleground for narrative warfare. To some, she was a self-made woman preparing for greatness. To others, she was already entangled in a web of secrets that would one day come to light. What is certain is that the Meghan who stood beside Harry in that first official photo call was not an ingenue. She was not a stranger to power. And perhaps, she was not as disconnected from royalty as we were led to believe. As we move forward, keep this chapter in mind. The calm before the scandal matters, because it tells us one thing above all: nothing in this story happened by accident. For those who followed Meghan Markle's rise into royal circles, the term yacht girl was once dismissed as nothing more than a cruel smear, an online slur hurled by anonymous trolls who couldn't accept the idea of a biracial American woman marrying into British royalty. But as time passed and allegations grew louder rather than fade, the term took on a far more complicated weight. What began as internet gossip evolved into a coded reference to a lifestyle that, for some, involved far more than just luxury vacations and Instagram photo ops. In elite circles, yachting doesn't just mean relaxing on a private vessel off the coast of Sardinia. It is an unspoken ecosystem where powerful men and beautiful women interact under an implied understanding. Sometimes it's modeling contracts. Sometimes it's companionship. In the darker corners of this arrangement, it involves transactional relationships shrouded by non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality, and silence. It is not illegal, but it is not innocent either. And for years, certain online communities and tabloid sources claimed Meghan had participated in this world during the years before she met Prince Harry. The first wave of rumors emerged when Meghan was still known mainly for her role on the television series Suits. Paparazzi shots captured her vacationing on high-end yachts in the Mediterranean. Often, she was accompanied by other models, actresses, or fashion influencers. These trips were labeled as influencer getaways or brand retreats, yet several industry insiders began to whisper about how these events were organized. Allegedly, these gatherings were less about business and more about introducing women to benefactors, wealthy men who sponsored the trips, sometimes directly, sometimes through intermediaries. One such intermediary was reportedly a European businessman with deep ties to the entertainment and fashion industry. According to a whistleblower who spoke under condition of anonymity, this man was responsible for organizing guest lists, coordinating travel, and ensuring discretion. Meghan, the source claimed, was among those invited on multiple occasions. Not just for leisure, but to be introduced to certain individuals who operated behind the curtain of public society. These individuals, the source elaborated, included names that would later become central figures in scandals surrounding human trafficking, blackmail, and elite corruption, none more notorious than Jeffrey Epstein. Though Meghan was never publicly linked to Epstein while he was alive, the timeline of her yacht excursions and his events ran parallel on more than one occasion. This included 2015, a year when Epstein was known to host private parties on yachts in southern Europe, often just outside the range of media scrutiny. In 2019, A now-deleted post from a European model's blog referenced an actress from a legal drama being present on a luxury yacht owned by a billionaire with ties to the British royal family. The post was vague, but the details, timing, location, and attendees pointed unmistakably toward Meghan. Attempts to reach the author were unsuccessful, and within weeks, the entire blog was taken offline. Those who managed to archive it described the content as damning, though legally unconfirmed. Meanwhile, a former yacht crew member, speaking to a fringe documentary series investigating Epstein's social network, described a woman matching Meghan's description who attended one of Epstein's events in the Aegean Sea. This woman, he said, was warm, clever, and clearly aware of how to navigate powerful men. When shown photographs of various celebrities, the crew member declined to point her out directly, but sources say he reacted noticeably when presented with Meghan's image. Whether this was mere recognition or something deeper remains speculation. What's undeniable is the volume of accounts that began to stack up, none individually damning, but together painting a shadowed portrait of Meghan's activities during that elusive pre-royal period. As questions mounted, Meghan remained silent. Her defenders called the allegations racist, sexist, and driven by jealousy. They dismissed the yacht girl label as a toxic cocktail of misogyny and classism. But her critics argued that Meghan's refusal to clarify her involvement in those years only deepened suspicion. More troubling were the accounts that connected these yacht gatherings to Prince Andrew. The Duke of York was already under investigation for his relationship with Epstein, and flight records showed he traveled frequently during the same seasons Meghan was alleged to have attended similar events. No evidence ever surfaced confirming they were at the same location at the same time, but the proximity was enough to raise questions. If they did meet during those yacht excursions, what was the nature of their interaction? One European tabloid, infamous for publishing unverifiable scoops, ran a story claiming Meghan and Andrew were photographed together in Monte Carlo in 2016, during a charity poker tournament hosted aboard a mega yacht. The article included a blurry photo of a woman who bore a resemblance to Meghan, standing beside a man in sunglasses alleged to be Andrew. The palace, as expected, issued no comment. Meghan's team denied the photo was her. But the damage had already been done. The seed was planted. As more of Epstein's victims began to speak out following his death, some began naming other guests at the parties, some recognizable, others obscured by code names or half-remembered identities. Meghan's name never appeared explicitly, but a few testimonies mentioned a brunette actress from an American drama series being present at key gatherings. Again, these statements were not enough for legal action, but enough to ignite public curiosity. It is in this environment that the term yacht girl returned with new venom. Social media began circulating theories that Meghan's royal marriage was part of a larger scheme. One orchestrated by unseen figures to insert someone into the British monarchy for reasons that ranged from espionage to financial leverage. These theories, while extreme, were shared widely and repeatedly by influencers and pseudo-investigative accounts, amplifying a narrative that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Palace insiders, when pressed off the record, maintained a cautious distance. A few hinted that during Meghan's vetting process before her engagement to Harry, questions had arisen about her social history. There were travel gaps and undisclosed associations that reportedly made palace advisors uneasy. However, the urgency to modernize the monarchy and the public relations value of Harry marrying a mixed-race, American, humanitarian actress outweighed those concerns. The silence from official channels did little to quell the firestorm. In the absence of denial, speculation flourished. Meghan's transition into royal life included a rigorous cleansing of her digital footprint, the sealing of personal records, and a notable lack of disclosure about her time in Europe. When asked in interviews about her early 30s, she often pivoted to broader themes: charity, acting, gender equity, never directly addressing her personal social scene. It wasn't until a 2023 tell-all book by a former entertainment publicist was published that the allegations resurfaced with intensity. The book, marketed as fiction but littered with real-life allusions, described a character modeled after Meghan attending a party hosted by a financier, with a private island, 2 jets, and a Rolodex of princes. The chapter detailed how the character charmed a royal, sparked tension among handlers, and disappeared for weeks before resurfacing in the tabloid spotlight. Readers immediately drew the comparison. Lawsuits were threatened. Sales skyrocketed. What this chapter reveals is not a proven scandal, but a documented ambiguity, an unclear space filled with half-truths, alleged sightings, and secondhand whispers. Whether Meghan was truly involved in Epstein's world remains unknown. But the consistency of these stories, the recurring timelines, the multiple indirect references, all suggest that the yacht girl rumors, however exaggerated, were not conjured from thin air. The implications, of course, are staggering. If Meghan did indeed interact with Prince Andrew before Harry, and if those interactions occurred in environments linked to Epstein, it would suggest a history that the royal family was either unaware of or willing to overlook. Either conclusion is deeply unsettling. But the most pressing question remains: why now? Why, after years of denial and silence, are these rumors gaining traction again? The answer lies ahead in the coming chapters. Because Meghan has finally spoken, and what she admits, whether through leaked audio or careful omission, will not only reshape public understanding of her past, but call into question the entire narrative upon which the Sussex story was built. When journalists first began investigating Jeffrey Epstein, they quickly learned his parties weren't just lavish social events. They were structured power plays, carefully choreographed gatherings where proximity to wealth and influence was not just a perk, but a commodity. For those invited, these weren't vacations or celebrations. They were additions for access. And who was in the room mattered as much as what happened in it. Epstein's events weren't advertised. There were no flyers, no RSVP links, no celebrity publicists tweeting about them afterward. Invitations came in whispers, often hand-delivered through elite handlers or mutual friends. If you received one, you either already had power or Epstein believed you were useful. This is what made his gatherings so uniquely dangerous. Every guest was either a player, a target, or both, and the dynamics between them were cloaked in layers of privilege, secrecy, and unspoken transaction. At the center of it all was Epstein himself, a man with no formal higher education, no known business model, and yet an inexplicable network of global elites who sought his company. Politicians, scientists, royalty. He built his influence not just by accumulating wealth, but by surrounding himself with those who needed something and giving it to them discreetly. Private jets, offshore accounts, young women. One of Epstein's favorite venues for these interactions was his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James. Described by investigators as both a paradise and a prison, it featured beachfront villas, lavish dining areas, and underground rooms rumored to host everything from illegal meetings to darker activities. It was here, according to victim statements and leaked documents, that some of the most well-known names in global politics and entertainment were seen behaving in ways they would never admit in public. But the island was only one stage. Epstein also hosted dozens of high-end parties aboard yachts, some his, some borrowed from friends. These floating palaces allowed him to evade scrutiny while ensuring attendees felt they were above consequence. These yachts traveled the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, even the Pacific. They docked outside the range of paparazzi and operated under international waters, effectively placing all activity beyond the reach of law enforcement in most jurisdictions. The guest lists for these events were often untraceable, but over the years, piecemeal revelations have helped reconstruct them. Flight logs, leaked emails, photographs, and whistleblower accounts point to a staggering collection of elites. Former U.S. presidents, Middle Eastern royalty, billionaire tech founders, supermodels, intelligence officials, and, critically, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince Andrew's association with Epstein is now public knowledge, but what remains less scrutinized is the extent of his presence at these private gatherings. Flight logs show he flew multiple times on Epstein's private jet, often to obscure destinations. Victim testimonies place him on Epstein's Island, in New York, and even at gatherings in London where Epstein arranged meetings under the guise of academic or philanthropic discussions. Andrew has denied all allegations of misconduct, but his lack of explanation for the frequency of his appearances in Epstein's orbit continues to erode public trust. This is where the narrative begins to overlap with Meghan Markle's alleged past. Reports suggest that some of the parties Epstein hosted between 2014 and 2016 included celebrities from the world of entertainment, actors, influencers, reality stars, and lifestyle bloggers. These guests were not household names at the time, but their presence added glamour and drew in more high-profile male attendees. Meghan, as a rising actress during this window, was allegedly seen at a handful of these events, not named in any official documents. but referenced through third-hand accounts and vague social media posts. A resurfaced Instagram photo from 2015, now deleted, shows a group of women posing on a yacht's upper deck. One woman, whose back is turned to the camera, wears a distinctive gold bracelet similar to one Meghan was photographed wearing the same summer. The original post tagged several obscure accounts, none of which are currently active. When this image began recirculating years later, online sleuths drew parallels to a known Epstein yacht registered off the coast of Greece. The image alone is not proof, but for many, it added to the growing puzzle. Why does it matter who was at these parties? Because Epstein's gatherings were not merely private events. They were leveraged moments. There is a reason he had surveillance equipment in his properties. A reason he reportedly kept dossiers on guests and recorded conversations. He wasn't hosting for fun. He was building collateral. According to investigative journalist sources, Epstein often arranged for specific individuals to be introduced under controlled conditions. A young actress could be presented to a businessman under the guise of philanthropy. A royal could strike up a conversation with someone believed to be simply another guest. But behind the scenes, Epstein was recording, documenting, and, if necessary, manipulating. He didn't care about the relationships. He cared about the leverage. If Meghan met Prince Andrew during one of these curated moments, the implications stretch far beyond scandal. It would mean that both were potentially caught in Epstein's wider web, two people whose eventual royal connection may not have been entirely accidental. Andrew, already compromised, and Meghan, on a meteoric rise, could have become assets in Epstein's long game of social infiltration. Whether knowingly or not, they were inside the architecture of his influence. One former security consultant, who worked for an agency contracted for a private Epstein event, recalled an unusual dynamic. A guest list where younger female attendees were clearly separated from older, powerful men until the event began. Then, introductions were made systematically, and every interaction was monitored. He claimed the atmosphere wasn't coercive on the surface, but incredibly controlled. Attendees were pampered, praised, and flattered. But everything was designed to create obligation. You were always being watched, even when you thought you weren't. This environment fosters secrets. It creates bonds that aren't easily broken. A single private conversation could lead to years of silence. A single compromise could become a tool of manipulation. Epstein was a master at this. And that's what makes Meghan's alleged connection to these parties so explosive. It's not about guilt. It's about exposure. Was she brought into rooms where things were recorded, observed, and archived without her knowledge? Was her path to royalty partly shaped by relationships that began on yachts, with powerful men steering more than just the vessel? And if so, how much of that past has been deliberately erased? These questions become even more urgent in light of recent developments. Following Epstein's death, many of his personal archives were seized. Some leaked, others vanished. But one recurring rumor persists that a private video library exists, containing footage from yachts, island meetings, and villa encounters. If Meghan appears in any of those recordings, even in passing, it could unravel not just her own reputation, but cast a long, damning shadow over the institution she married into. The reason this matters now is because silence is no longer sustainable. As more former Epstein associates face legal pressure, more names emerge. The cultural moment has shifted. What was once whispered is now investigated. What was once dismissed as conspiracy is now courtroom evidence. And in this context, Meghan's presence or absence from those archives becomes more than a personal issue. It becomes a matter of public interest, national embarrassment, and possibly international scandal. That's the power of Epstein's parties. They weren't just moments in time. They were setups. Psychological chess games designed to blur the lines between pleasure, power, and exploitation. And they continued to ripple outward years after his death, entangling those who thought they had moved on, left it behind, or covered their tracks. In the next chapter, we'll look directly at that alleged moment of meeting, when Meghan and Prince Andrew's paths crossed. Not just as a twist of fate, but as a calculated interaction staged in a world where nothing happened by accident, and where every handshake, every smile, and every whispered compliment may have been scripted long before anyone stepped aboard. It was a moment neither the press nor the palace could confirm, but those closest to the scandal say it happened quietly, behind tinted glass and under artificial lights reflecting off dark waters. The first alleged meeting between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew didn't occur at a red carpet gala or royal garden party. According to sources close to the event, their initial interaction happened offshore, on a yacht, somewhere between Monaco and Cannes, during an exclusive, invitation-only party attended by billionaires, nobility, and carefully selected female guests flown in for companionship, entertainment, or perhaps something deeper. The exact date is still debated, but most signs point to the summer of 2015. Meghan had already carved out a modest niche for herself in television. Her work on Suits had given her name recognition, particularly in Canada and the United States. But in Europe, her presence was still a mystery, her name one of many on a list of rising stars who floated in and out of events with little fanfare. Prince Andrew, however, was already a household name, and a deeply controversial one at that. His relationship with Jeffrey Epstein had started raising eyebrows long before it became global headline material. Despite that, or perhaps because of it, Andrew remained a fixture at high-end gatherings, maintaining the illusion of royalty's untouchable charm while his reputation began to corrode behind palace walls. This particular yacht party, described by an unnamed source who once worked for a Mediterranean charter company, was hosted by a Lebanese investor with ties to both British aristocracy and the Hollywood elite. The guest list included European financiers, a handful of low-profile royals, and several women from the entertainment and modeling industries, many of whom had no clear affiliation with the hosts beyond their beauty and their social media visibility. According to the same source, Meghan was introduced as a guest of a guest, arriving on a smaller boat before being escorted aboard just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The party was unlike anything Meghan had publicly experienced before. There were no PR teams, no handlers watching every move, no red carpet. This was the kind of event where reputation was currency, but only the kind that stayed invisible, reputation built not through magazines but through whispers and private recommendations. She was, at that time, not yet royal, not yet a global name. But she held herself with confidence, say witnesses. She knew how to navigate a room where powerful men preferred soft voices and long glances over press releases and fanfare. Prince Andrew, dressed in a light blazer and open-collared shirt, was said to be in a surprisingly good mood that evening, despite his growing legal woes. Guests noticed he spent most of the night near the central deck lounge, sipping a single malt whiskey and engaging with younger guests who seemed unsure how to address him, Your Royal Highness or just Sir. One of those guests, allegedly, was Meghan. An assistant on the yacht described the interaction in vague but revealing terms. They spoke briefly at first, very casual, she said. He asked her where she was from, and she joked that she was American but trying to behave herself in European company. It was a line, the assistant remembered, that made Andrew laugh. From then on, they kept ending up in the same corners of the party, she added. According to another guest, whose family has since distanced themselves from Epstein-related inquiries, the chemistry was evident but not romantic. It wasn't flirtation, not in the traditional sense. It was more strategic, the guest explained. Meghan was working the room. Andrew was curious. I think he enjoyed the attention. She knew exactly how to ask the kinds of questions that made him feel like he was still someone important. This interaction, short as it may have been, carries significant weight when placed against the larger backdrop of royal scrutiny and Meghan's eventual marriage into the family. If she met Andrew before she met Harry, and if their meeting was under such circumstances, it challenges the official timeline presented by both the palace and Meghan herself. Meghan's public account of meeting Prince Harry has always begun with a friend's introduction in 2016 and a few flirty Instagram messages. There was no mention of prior encounters with any member of the royal family. No suggestion that she had ever been in the same orbit, let alone on the same yacht, as a Windsor. But insiders now believe that her brief interaction with Andrew, whether it lasted minutes or hours, may have sparked a ripple effect, creating a line of royal intrigue that eventually placed her directly in the spotlight. If Andrew had mentioned her name to his inner circle, even in passing, that information could have trickled through the palace ranks, placing her on the radar of royal watchers long before her first official date with Harry. It may even explain how she ended up on the radar of the friend who eventually introduced her to him. Royal circles are small, interconnected, and highly strategic. A single name, if spoken in the right ear, can shift alliances, trigger introductions, and change the course of family dynamics. Some royal aides, speaking under the condition of anonymity, claim that Harry was warned early in his relationship with Meghan, not about her acting past, not about her being American, but about her previous networking habits, as one put it delicately. There were no formal objections, but there was concern. Not because of who Meghan was on paper, but because of who she may have been in places the palace preferred not to acknowledge existed. But there was another factor to consider. Andrew, while deeply embedded in scandal by 2015, still held sway in certain royal decision-making circles. His ties to international diplomacy, defense deals, and shadowy financial networks meant he wasn't just a family embarrassment, he was a liability with influence. If he had indeed met Meghan and found her impressive, as one source suggested, he could have indirectly played a role in her trajectory toward Harry, not because he facilitated it, but because he failed to raise objections when it mattered. Silence in palace politics is as powerful as endorsement. This possibility is supported by the fact that Meghan and Andrew were never seen together publicly after her marriage to Harry. In fact, insiders say they went to great lengths to avoid each other at royal functions. Body language experts have pointed out their total lack of interaction during events where they stood just meters apart. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, as if a mutual decision had been made to pretend there was nothing there. Nothing at all. But the lack of visible connection may have had the opposite effect. In a world obsessed with optics, sometimes what you don't see is more telling than what you do. And for those paying attention, the silence between Meghan and Andrew became deafening, especially in light of what was later revealed about Andrew's relationship with Epstein and the full scope of the sex trafficking accusations surrounding them. In retrospect, it's easy to imagine this entire narrative as fiction. A prince and a starlet. A secret meeting on a billionaire's yacht. An encounter that led, not to romance, but to a chain reaction ending in marriage, monarchy, and scandal. But multiple insiders insist this version, while not confirmed, is far more plausible than the sanitized stories told in memoirs and documentaries. Because it fits the pattern. It fits the personalities. And it fits the silence. Meghan's story is one of transformation, reinvention, and resilience. But in every transformation, there is a moment of convergence, when two paths intersect and history is redirected. Her meeting with Andrew, if it happened as described, may have been that moment. A brief collision of two lives drifting through overlapping circles of influence and secrecy. It was not love at first sight. It was not destiny. It was something simpler and far more unsettling. It was access. Recognition. The first step through a door that led, eventually, to a palace, a crown, and a controversy that would shake one of the oldest monarchies in the world. And now, nearly a decade later, the consequences of that encounter are still unfolding. Because history does not forget. It simply waits for the right moment to remind us. There are stories that unfold in the open, and there are stories designed to vanish as they happen. What allegedly followed after Meghan Markle's first interaction with Prince Andrew wasn't meant for public knowledge, nor was it structured like a traditional romance. According to a collection of sources, yacht crew members, discreet hotel staffers, a retired royal security advisor. It was a pattern of short, tightly controlled meetings, hidden beneath layers of secrecy and logistical sleight of hand. They weren't lovers in the traditional sense. They were symbols of status circling each other, testing boundaries, each with something to gain. The alleged meetings between Meghan and Andrew, according to whispered accounts, took place in 3 European cities between 2015 and early 2016, Monaco, London, and Zurich. Each location offered different layers of anonymity. Monaco's private hotels and off-grid mansions hosted affairs for the ultra-rich shielded from paparazzi by corrupt discretion. London's royal accommodations provided internal cover, where foot traffic through secured palace annexes was never recorded. In Zurich, an unexpected outlier, served as neutral ground, where private banking and exclusive events were easier to hide behind a professional pretense. The question that hangs over this chapter is one of motivation. What did Meghan want? What did Andrew seek? The answers aren't found in romance or emotion. Instead, they reside in power dynamics. For Andrew, sources claim, there was a need to feel relevant. He had become a prince with diminishing influence. After years of military service, ceremonial duties, and a failed marriage, his name was now tied more to scandal than strategy. The Epstein affair was growing louder. His royal responsibilities were shrinking. He had become a liability in the eyes of the crown, a man whose only weapon left was his access. Meeting someone like Meghan, young, ambitious, American, and unafraid, was a tonic. She didn't treat him like a relic. She didn't fear his reputation. She engaged him as someone who understood what proximity to royalty could mean. And he, in turn, responded, not with charm or grandeur, but with availability. He granted time, privacy, intimacy in the form of access, the rarest form of currency in aristocratic society. For Meghan, according to palace informants and anonymous social insiders, the value of the interaction lay not in the prince himself, but in what he represented, a shortcut into elite rooms where introductions were more valuable than invitations. Andrew wasn't the man she was chasing. He was a gatekeeper. A flawed one, yes, but still powerful in the way doors opened after his name was mentioned. One account describes a particular meeting in London at a private residence believed to be owned by a friend of Andrew's, a man with diplomatic immunity and ties to the arms industry. The property, guarded by former intelligence officers, had hosted countless covert meetings, and according to a staffer, Meghan was seen entering through a service entrance just after midnight. She stayed no more than 90 minutes. The visit was unrecorded, undocumented, and never mentioned again. Another story, this time from Monaco, placed Meghan at a gathering hosted during the Grand Prix weekend. She was listed as a guest under a fashion brand sponsorship, but eyewitnesses say she spent most of her time on the upper level of a yacht where Prince Andrew was also present. Security teams were instructed to clear lower decks when either of them moved between rooms, a sign of coordination that went beyond coincidence. One steward recalled overhearing a conversation about keeping everything off paper and ensuring no crossover with press schedules. A former royal bodyguard who has since retired from public duty described the Zurich meeting as the most suspicious. Andrew had no official reason to be in the city. Meghan, meanwhile, was allegedly attending a silent charity auction benefiting a children's hospital. But flight records suggest both were in Zurich for a 48-hour window, staying at separate luxury hotels only a few blocks apart. Neither appeared in official event photos, and no public record links them to the same itinerary. Yet surveillance logs from the hotel entrances, according to an anonymous former Swiss intelligence contractor, show a woman matching Meghan's description entering Andrew's hotel after midnight and not exiting until nearly sunrise. This pattern of interaction, late-night visits, off-the-books meetups, evasive scheduling, is familiar in the world of royal scandals. It's not the quantity of meetings that raises suspicion, but the manner in which they were orchestrated. When individuals go to great lengths to avoid being seen together, it rarely suggests innocence. It suggests stakes. The secrecy surrounding Meghan and Andrew's alleged interactions is further complicated by a chilling consistency in behavior. At each location, staff who spoke out afterward noted similar instructions. No eye contact. No names spoken aloud. No devices allowed near the principal guests. This wasn't casual discretion. This was engineered invisibility. And when such precautions are taken across multiple locations and countries, the implication is undeniable. These were not chance encounters. As for what occurred during these meetings, no one can say with certainty. No recordings have surfaced. No photographs have been leaked. Only the pattern remains. But sources close to Andrew's former security staff hinted that Meghan was viewed as someone gathering intelligence in her own way, not for espionage, but for personal leverage. She knew who Andrew was, what he was facing, and how controversial his name had become. Engaging with him, even temporarily, could be a risk or a future asset, depending on how things unfolded. One theory, floated by a British journalist who has investigated Epstein's social ring, posits that Meghan used these interactions to test the waters of royal society, that she never planned to remain connected to Andrew, but wanted to understand the terrain. How palace dynamics worked, what people talked about behind closed doors, who controlled access to whom. If true, this makes her later relationship with Harry far more strategic than romantic fantasy. It transforms the narrative from fairy tale to blueprint. But it also raises uncomfortable questions about Andrew's judgment. If he allowed someone like Meghan into his orbit during a time when his reputation was already under siege, what was he thinking? Did he not anticipate how any connection to a future duchess, especially one tied to Epstein's broader network, could explode years later? Or was he simply too arrogant to care? There's also the question of why neither Meghan nor Andrew ever publicly addressed the rumors. For years, they allowed speculation to mount. Meghan, despite multiple interviews, memoirs, and documentaries, never once mentioned Andrew as part of her past. Andrew, for his part, went silent on nearly every issue post-Epstein. And yet, The lack of denial served as its own kind of confession. In a world where optics are everything, their refusal to acknowledge even a passing acquaintance spoke louder than words. It's possible, of course, that nothing physical happened, that their meetings were purely intellectual, social, or exploratory. But the lengths taken to hide them suggest otherwise. Even casual conversations don't warrant this level of security. And when the interactions happen in private, across borders, and under aliases, the line between innocent and illicit becomes razor-thin. This chapter of Hidden Desires isn't just about Meghan and Andrew. It's about what their alleged interactions reveal about power, privilege, and desperation. About how even the most powerful people can be drawn together not by romance, but by the mutual recognition of what the other represents. For Andrew, perhaps it was validation. For Meghan, perhaps it was opportunity. And for both, it was a secret they assumed would never come to light. But light has a way of finding cracks. And now, years later, the secrecy they once relied on has become the very evidence used to question everything that followed. Royal families don't operate like ordinary households. Their palaces are not merely homes. They are fortresses of tradition, surveillance, and control. Every guest is vetted, every conversation eventually reported, and no relationship is ever entirely private. Within such an environment, nothing escapes scrutiny for long. And so, as the rumors of Meghan Markle's alleged secret meetings with Prince Andrew began to circulate beyond yachts and discreet European hotels, they reached the ears of those who mattered most, the inner circle of the House of Windsor. It didn't happen all at once. The first signs were subtle, almost unnoticeable to outsiders. A misplaced look. An oddly phrased question during an engagement. A staffer redirected to other duties without explanation. But within the palace, the ripples were immediate. Meghan was not yet a royal, not even officially dating Prince Harry. Yet whispers about her past were already making their way through the corridors of Buckingham and Clarence House. The Windsor family has its own intelligence network. It doesn't wear earpieces or flash badges. It comes in the form of private secretaries, long-serving butlers, discreet social advisors, and retired military operatives with backgrounds in MI5 and MI6. They gather information not to spy, but to protect the crown, its image, its secrets, and its legacy. And when new figures enter royal proximity, that system goes into quiet overdrive. In late 2015, a dossier allegedly began to circulate among certain royal aides. It wasn't an official government file, more a collection of memos, press clippings, redacted social media screenshots, and confidential eyewitness statements. The subject, Meghan Markle. Its contents were far from conclusive but enough to raise concern. Her travel patterns, her sudden inclusion in high-profile events outside her normal media range, and most notably, her appearance at gatherings where Prince Andrew was known to be present. There was no smoking gun, no explicit evidence of misconduct. But the timing was troubling. Andrew, under immense pressure due to his association with Epstein, was being internally distanced from official duties. Any new scandal involving him, especially one linking him to a glamorous American actress, would have been catastrophic for the monarchy's already fragile standing. Palace advisors knew this, and they moved fast. At first, Meghan's name was flagged in background briefings with vague warnings, unverified associations, unclear affiliations, potential optics risk. But when Harry began speaking of her with increasing seriousness, referring to her in private conversations, inviting her into confidential discussions about family charity work, the tone shifted. What began as curiosity became concern. Princess and was reportedly the first senior royal to openly question Meghan's rising visibility. Known for her bluntness and traditionalism, and had little patience for showbiz or what she once referred to as celebrity activism. According to insiders, she expressed doubts during a private dinner, stating plainly, "She doesn't feel like one of us. She knows how to pose, but does she know how to serve?" It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was an observation rooted in a lifetime of experience navigating both public duty and personal discretion. Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, took a more cautious stance. She believed in letting time reveal motives. Yet even she, known for her cool detachment, is said to have asked Charles during a meeting, "Do we know where she's been before this? Who she's been close to?" Charles reportedly brushed off the question at first, seeing Meghan as an American actress who could bring modern flair to a tired institution. But as the rumors around Andrew intensified, even he became more inquisitive. Behind the scenes, private investigators were discreetly employed, not through government channels, but through third-party firms with ties to royal donors. Their mission wasn't to dig for scandal, but to verify that no future headlines would jeopardize the monarchy. What they found was murky. Meghan had indeed traveled in elite circles. Her name came up in yacht guest logs, albeit unofficially. She had attended exclusive events where Epstein associates had also been present. Nothing illegal, nothing provable, but everything added to a picture that contradicted the palace's preferred image of an untainted newcomer. This is when the internal conflict began. Prince Harry, fiercely protective and growing increasingly serious about Meghan, was made aware of some of these concerns. According to a former aide, a meeting took place in early 2016 between Harry and a senior royal advisor, during which he was shown part of the unofficial report. The advisor didn't accuse Meghan of anything, but suggested caution, warning Harry that the media was ruthless and that any undisclosed connection between Meghan and Andrew or anyone linked to Epstein would be magnified beyond control. Harry, reportedly, was furious, not just at the implication, but at what he perceived as institutional prejudice. He believed the palace was using Meghan's race, nationality, and profession to justify invasive scrutiny, that she was being judged for things no white woman would be asked to explain. The conversation ended with Harry storming out and vowing to protect Meghan no matter what it cost him. And the cost was high. From that moment forward, a wall began to rise between Harry and certain members of his family. Trust eroded. Conversations grew tense. Even the Queen, who maintained a veneer of neutrality, found herself caught between two factions, those urging caution and those pleading for acceptance. She reportedly summoned Meghan for tea before the relationship became public, hoping to form her own opinion. By all accounts, Meghan was charming, composed, and respectfully deferential. But those who were present said Her Majesty asked one question that hung in the air. "Have you met Andrew before Harry?" Meghan, without hesitation, said no. Whether that answer was truthful or not remains unconfirmed. But from that moment on, the Queen treated Meghan with courtesy, not warmth. Observers noted a change in tone, less effusive, more measured. A signal, perhaps, that she was hedging her bets. Elsewhere in the family, alliances began to shift. William, ever the cautious heir, reportedly advised Harry to slow things down. Kate remained mostly silent, avoiding confrontation. But her absence from early meetings involving Meghan's introduction to the family did not go unnoticed. And behind palace walls, the phrase "too fast, too soon" became a quiet mantra. Andrew himself said nothing. He neither confirmed nor denied knowing Meghan. When asked by a staffer if he had ever interacted with her before Harry, he simply shrugged and said, "She seems capable." A statement so vague it left more questions than answers. But his lack of defense or warning struck some in the palace as strategic. If he had nothing to hide, why not say so? What followed was a series of decisions driven not by clarity, but by containment. Meghan's first public appearances were tightly choreographed. Her access to royal archives, advisors, and internal briefings was carefully moderated. While the press portrayed her arrival as revolutionary, behind the scenes, she was being handled with extreme caution. Not because she had done something wrong, but because the institution didn't know what would surface next. Staff who worked closest to Meghan during her transition described a woman constantly navigating tension. She was polite, thoughtful, but clearly aware that she was being watched. One aide recalled, "She smiled a lot, but you could feel the calculation. She always seemed to be managing two realities at once, what she wanted to say and what she knew would be recorded." Another said she kept detailed notes on every meeting, a practice uncommon for incoming royals. Whether this was for her own protection or control, no one could say. Meanwhile, the press began circling. Journalists with access to leaks picked up on the palace's unease. Stories began to appear, not yet about Andrew, but about Meghan's social climb. Her former friendships were dissected. Old blog posts were scrutinized. Travel records became subjects of Reddit threads and YouTube exposés. One tabloid published a speculative piece claiming Meghan had attended an elite private gathering known to include controversial figures. Though no names were listed, the implications were clear. The palace made no comment. As the pressure mounted, the family reached a tipping point. Either embrace Meghan completely or risk a public implosion if contradictions emerged later. They chose the former. In November 2017, the engagement was announced. Smiling photographs, ring displays, carefully crafted love story. For a moment, the world fell for it. But inside the royal machine, not everyone was convinced. The unanswered questions remained locked in private reports and silent exchanges between those sworn never to speak publicly. Andrew, conveniently, began fading from the spotlight. Meghan, with Harry's full support, stepped into it. And the palace, hoping to control the storm, gambled on the belief that what happened before the fairy tale didn't matter, so long as the story held together. What they failed to consider was this: the truth never stays buried forever. By the time Prince Harry entered Meghan Markle's life, she was no longer a struggling actress nor an obscure blogger writing about wine, wellness, and self-empowerment. She had ascended socially, navigated exclusive European events, aligned herself with wealthy insiders, and curated a public image that was both progressive and polished. But Harry didn't see the strategy. He saw the sparkle. And from that first moment, he was drawn in, not by reputation, but by projection. He saw someone unlike anyone he had ever dated. Someone who didn't recoil from his royal shadow, but leaned into it with confidence and charm. In many ways, Meghan was exactly what Harry had been searching for. Throughout his 20s, he had lived in a strange paradox: enormous privilege coupled with suffocating scrutiny. His relationships were fleeting, often driven more by convenience than compatibility. He longed for substance, but everyone he met already knew who he was before he opened his mouth. His vulnerability became a commodity. His trust, a rare and fragile currency. Meghan, on the surface, offered something different. Their introduction in 2016, as publicly told, occurred through a mutual friend. Some say fashion designer Mishinano. Others point to Violet von Wessenholz. The details remain vague by design. What is known is that the meeting was not random. Meghan had moved within the periphery of aristocratic circles, had recently been in London for various social and charity events, and had even stayed at Soho House, a members-only club known for brokering introductions between rising stars and social elite. Harry was intrigued from the start. Meghan was beautiful, articulate, and unlike the typical women from his social world. She carried herself with independence, had causes she spoke about with passion, and crucially, was not British. To Harry, that distance felt like freedom. To Meghan, it was opportunity. Whether romantic or strategic, or both, depends on who's telling the story. Those closest to Harry noticed the shift almost immediately. Friends who had watched him bounce from one tabloid affair to another saw something different in his demeanor. He was obsessed. Within weeks of meeting Meghan, he was texting constantly, planning visits, and rearranging schedules to make time for her. He flew to Toronto to see her. He introduced her to key members of his inner circle. He even started changing his media strategy, growing more defiant in his criticism of the press. But Harry wasn't just acting from love. He was acting from memory. His mother, Princess Diana, had been chased to her death by photographers. His former girlfriends had been harassed, ridiculed, and torn apart. The British media had always been a monster to him, and he feared it would destroy Meghan before their story could even begin. That fear turned into urgency. He needed to protect her, and the more people around him raised concerns about her past or her associations, the more fiercely he dug in his heels. Those early warnings came from more than one source. A few close friends, mostly from his military days, had heard whispers about Meghan's ties to certain parties, certain yachts, and certain names, including Prince Andrew. One friend reportedly told him, "Be careful, mate. She's got a past, and people are talking." Another, more cautious, suggested Harry slow down, suggesting a full vetting through unofficial channels. But Harry was already emotionally committed. To him, the criticisms felt coded, tinged with classism, racism, and an outdated view of who deserved to marry into royalty. The palace's reaction was colder. As discussed in the previous chapter, Meghan's name had already raised internal alarms. But when she began appearing regularly in Harry's life, that concern turned to silent panic. Staffers at Kensington Palace began preparing for a potential relationship rollout. Meghan's previous media presence had to be scrubbed. The TIG, her personal lifestyle blog, was taken offline. Interviews were pulled. Images deleted. Every trace of her life before Harry was filtered, cleaned, and sealed. Yet despite these efforts, not everything could be erased. Background checks revealed inconsistencies, gaps in timelines, unexplained trips, connections to high-net-worth individuals with reputations too complicated for press releases. One internal memo, leaked years later, outlined concerns that Meghan may have been present at European events hosted by individuals now under investigation for ties to Jeffrey Epstein. The memo didn't accuse Meghan of wrongdoing. It simply posed the question, have all affiliations been vetted for long-term reputational risk? Harry was shown parts of that memo. He reportedly tore it up. His response was clear. He loved Meghan, and if the institution couldn't support her, he would leave it behind. This was the first time Harry openly spoke about stepping away from royal duties. Not in front of the media, not even to his family, but in private, among aides and friends, the words were said, "If this gets ugly, I'm done. I'll walk." Still, not all early reactions were negative. A few members of the inner royal orbit saw the potential. Meghan was polished, media-trained, and spoke the language of modern values. She could be the refresh the monarchy needed, a counterweight to stale traditions. And to be fair, Meghan did make efforts to endear herself to the family. She attended family events, spent time with the Queen's corgis, and joined Harry on official duties before the engagement was announced. But behind the scenes, doubts persisted. There was one incident, rarely spoken of publicly, that multiple insiders have quietly referenced. It occurred during a dinner at a private estate outside London. Harry had brought Meghan to meet a small group of family friends. The evening was casual, fireplace conversations, simple food, guarded laughter. But at one point, the conversation turned to Epstein, who had recently re-emerged in headlines due to renewed investigations. A guest made a grim joke about Andrew and yachts. Meghan, without hesitation, is said to have laughed and then abruptly changed the subject. It was a moment so quick, so effortless, that only a few caught it. Later that night, one guest asked another, "Did she just dodge something?" It wasn't what she said, but what she didn't say. A moment when silence drew more questions than answers. By the time the official engagement was announced in November 2017, the palace had made its choice. Despite ongoing background concerns and whispers from media outlets preparing exposés, the royal family embraced the narrative. Meghan was the future, and Harry was unmovable. To deny her was to risk a constitutional scandal driven by modern politics, race, and generational division. The relationship moved quickly from that point. Meghan was baptized into the Church of England, fast-tracked into royal training, and assigned aides to prepare her for the duties of a duchess. But the speed came at a cost. Unlike Kate Middleton, who had spent nearly a decade easing into royal life, Meghan was expected to adapt in mere months. And all the while, the questions remained. Harry, despite his protective instincts, was not blind. He knew Meghan was hiding things. Not necessarily terrible things, but details, context, people. He once asked her, during a private retreat in Scotland, whether there was anything in her past that could become a threat. Meghan reportedly said, "Only what others decide to believe." It wasn't a denial. It was a warning. Their bond, by this point, had hardened into something more than love. It was defiance. A mutual understanding that the world was against them, and they would survive only by staying united. But while Harry focused on the future, the past kept crawling into the headlines. A photo resurfaced. A name reappeared. A new witness stepped forward. And at the center of every controversy was the same quiet suggestion that Meghan had once been somewhere she shouldn't, with someone she never mentioned, and that person's name was Prince Andrew. Whether Harry confronted her directly about Andrew is unknown. Some insiders believe he did, and that Meghan swore there was nothing inappropriate. Others believe he chose not to ask, preferring to protect his version of the truth. In either case, the result was the same: silence. But silence doesn't erase history. And as the royal family attempted to rebrand itself with Meghan and Harry at the forefront, the past they tried to outrun continued to tighten its grip. This chapter is not about betrayal. It's about timing. About how Harry, in trying to escape the ghost of his mother's past, may have unknowingly invited a different kind of scandal into the heart of the monarchy. Meghan didn't create this tension alone. She entered a system already fractured. But her arrival and Harry's unwavering commitment to her changed the course of the royal family forever.